Luana Dor.
I'm Dana Del Rey.
I'm Regina Shumway.
And this is our extraordinary teacher, Mr. Michael Lau.
Mr. Lau, nice to have you here. In Brandenburg versus Ohio, the United States Supreme Court created a two-part test for limiting free expression. Speech can be limited if it's directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using the Brandenburg test to limit free speech? And how should this test be applied to social media? Does the decision in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District apply to student speech on social media? Why or why not? Should public schools limit student speech posted on social media that criticizes teachers and administrators? Why or why not?
The advantages of using this two-part test to limit the freedom of expression is that it means that individuals cannot be arrested for simply expressing an opinion that is viewed as unpopular or even despicable to the American public. In the aforementioned Brandenburg v. Ohio case, the Supreme Court ruled that Ohio's criminal syndicalism law violated the First Amendment rights of Ku Klux Klan leader Clarence Brandenburg. The law banned people from advocating crime and or lawless action as a means of reformation. It was declared unconstitutional because the two-part test ruled that freedom of expression could only be limited in this case if the speech was guaranteed to produce imminent lawless action.
The advantage of using the two-part test in the context of social media is that the government could restrict the ability of vigilante or hate groups from using internet communication to incite violence. Disadvantages of this test are that people may use subtle or indirect calls to violence or lawlessness, in which case the two-part test would not suggest any limitation of their freedom of speech. Applying this law becomes difficult when intent or tone is unclear, which is especially problematic on social media where a joke may be mistakenly considered to be a serious threat. When being applied to social media, we believe this test should study the context of the situation and the background of the speaker before making further decisions.
We believe the decision in Tinker should apply to student speech on social media sites. In the case of Tinker, the ruling upheld that school officials needed to prove that the conduct would materially and substantially interfere with the operation of school. In this case, the school district's actions evidently stemmed from a fear of possible disruption rather than any actual interference. The issue concerning student speech on social media sites involves whether students can be limited or punished for speech on a public forum, such as the internet. Student speech on social media sites should apply to this case, meaning that students have the rights to express themselves under certain circumstances, as it is their First Amendment right to do so.
While students have a right to express themselves online under the Tinker test, if the speech substantially interferes with the school, then the administration may limit the speech. Schools have a compelling interest to protect the safety of their students and therefore can limit speech that infringes upon that. As we can see from the ruling in the case of Bell versus Itawamba County School Board, the Fifth Circuit Court ruled that school officials can extend their disciplinary actions to student speech outside of school as dictated by the Tinker standard.
Public schools should not limit student speech posted on social media sites that criticizes teachers or administrators unless the speech matches the standards set in the case of Tinker v. Des Moines and substantially interferes with the operation of the school. Other student posts are not the school's responsibility to limit and should instead be held to the same standards as other press. Speech that should be limited would include false statements of fact as determined through Gertz v. Welsh, obscenity as determined through Miller v. California, fighting words as determined through Czaplinski v. New Hampshire, true threats as determined in Watts v. United States, and hate speech that intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causes severe emotional distress. Legitimate complaints or comments on teachers and administrators should not be limited.
Some may feel that even speech that does not match these standards should be limited because students are impressionable, and if they're allowed to bully teachers and say offensive things, it could negatively influence the students or teachers. Allowing students to feel they have a right to say negative things publicly about people, especially towards people in a position of power over them, could shape them into adults that are not kind to their peers and could lead them to losing future jobs, because saying offensive things publicly about your boss is not protected by the First Amendment. Educating students about civic responsibility is a step we could take that would help students understand that having a right to say something does not mean you should say it, and that the things you say have consequences, not only for yourself, but others.
Tell me, what is your opinion? Is voting a right or a privilege?
I would say voting is a political right that should be granted to all citizens of the United States, as so long as they did not commit a high crime of rebellion or other crimes like a felony.
I believe that voting is also a civic duty that we as citizens have to participate in order to grow our nation and to choose who we want to represent us, and which will result in more democracy as a whole.
Approximately 20 countries have compulsory voting. That is, that all citizens who are eligible to vote must vote. Should the United States enact compulsory voting? Please justify your position.
I don't know, I think that the United States shouldn't enact compulsory voting because many low-income people do not have the time to vote because they work multiple jobs and such. And there are many other people who represent their opinion and can vote.
I believe that compulsory voting will infringe on one of our fundamental rights, which is freedom of speech. And I believe that not going to vote is one of our rights to protest to the candidates and to say that we don't want the candidates that's up for nomination for the presidency or for the state seat. So I think compulsory voting would be against the idea of freedom of speech.
Yeah, while our voter turnout isn't necessarily the best, hovering at about 58% in this past election, I believe that trying to rectify this by forcing people to vote wouldn't necessarily produce the best result. But I do believe that we should not disenfranchise voters purposefully or have the effect of disenfranchising voters, and I believe Shelby County v. Holder did this.
I'm going to ask you about this category of Americans that you've alluded to already, the felons. And the question has to do with, should felons, people that have committed felonies who have served their sentences be allowed to vote? And why or why not?
I believe that they have already been punished, and since they have served their sentence, they do regain their right to vote, I feel.
While there's a Supreme Court case of Richard v. Ramirez, which was at Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, justifies the taking of political rights away from citizens or taking away the right to vote, and that is not conflicting with the 14th Amendment. I also agree with my colleague that after they serve their punishment, a just punishment wouldn't take away more rights after they have gone through the prison system.
What policies can be enacted to increase voter turnout?
I think we can enact policies that doesn't necessarily disenfranchise minorities. We can add more polling stations or make voting easier for individuals or minorities who are in poverty. More specifically, these minorities are in poverty, and they hold multiple jobs, like 2 or 3 jobs, and they don't necessarily have the time to drive several hours to a polling station and wait in line for several hours to vote.
I would say that a specific policy also would be to allow same-day registration, because I have a lot of friends who just became adults, and often they don't think about registering before or a while before. It's like a month before that you have to register, so they don't always think about that. If we have same-day registration, then people can go and vote. People can vote on the same day and register on the same day.
A recent study by UC San Diego actually showed that areas with voter ID laws actually have decreased turnout among minority populations. And I think that not having voter ID laws would also help with voter turnout.
Because actually 11% of Americans don't have a suitable ID that would allow them to vote.
In some parts of the U.S., non-citizens are allowed to participate in voting at the local level. Do you agree with that? Do you think it should be extended, limited? Why?
I think voting rights should be limited to citizens of the United States because they are citizens of the United States, and their opinions are what matter the most. I say they're priority to the government, and yeah.
I would agree with my colleague here about having citizens vote, because I believe that when you become a citizen, you're kind of signing a contract that you have a stake in the country, and by making that stake in that country, you get a political right. They still will have their natural rights and all of their other fundamental rights upheld, but I believe that a political right is something that should be afforded to citizens only.
And allowing only citizens to vote will be more, I guess, more aligned with what the people of the nation really want. And having like non-citizens vote can sometimes causes consequences that can negatively impact our society that we live in.
So, for example, here in Honolulu, at neighborhood boards, permanent residents who are not citizens are allowed to vote. So, are you guys advocating that that be ended?
For the local boards, where they're not actually always enacting policy and they're just making people aware of what their priorities are, I would say that there would probably be an exception there. But as for elections, actual elections like state elections or national elections, I do not believe that they should be able to participate in those.
Well, why?
I'm sorry.
Oh, time.
Judge Wilson, Tom. They're all breathing a sigh of relief.
And the first place team who is qualified or able to go to the national competition, which is going to be held in Leesburg, Virginia, and sometime in April. It's going to Kahuku.
Virginia!